Good morning, Scott here, known as Cantaloupe to some online, and I'm bringing a video to you on a subject that's interesting to me. It might be of interest to you or someone you know, and I want to respond to the idea of libertarianism in a few minutes. Just in a few minutes. This won't be a deep dive. Libertarianism, as far as I understand, is the position, the political belief that less government or zero government is ideal, in a nutshell. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's kind of connected to the idea of anarchy, but not exactly, and let me explain the difference if I could. Libertarianism assumes, first of all, that zero government is even realistic. It's possible, but I don't think it is. I don't think you'll ever get to zero, but that's not necessarily a deal breaker for something to reach for in principle, as you'll see with anarchy, which I'll cover in just a second. But libertarianism is about non-interference, I think. And I'm not an expert, I'm not a libertarian, but based on what I've heard, it's about minimizing, to the point of zero if possible, the role and interference of government, entities, agencies, operations, centralization, all that stuff, so that the people are free to do what they need to do, with the view that the government typically does more harm than good. That's kind of the idea that I understand. So, unfortunately, you can't dispense with government, like I said. You cannot ever get to zero because there's got to be some scheduling, some kind of order, some kind of, managerial processes at which point you have government. Again, you have government. It's going to always happen. There's going to be a schedule manager if you have a schedule, and you pretty much need one at some point. And as soon as that person takes the job, they've got a disproportionate amount of power, just by being the schedule manager, by way of its position, by virtue of having access to the schedule, having editing access, that is. And you'll see that this is true for every real government position, that there's some element of power that derives from the position itself in terms of access and influence, which is why these positions are sought after, why people campaign to get them, and why people are called representatives, elected representatives, usually in this part of the world. In principle, anyway. But I mentioned libertarianism is connected to anarchy, and I want to talk about anarchy. That's really the subject here. Anarchy is thought to be chaos. It's thought to be a state of nature. This is what I heard growing up from everybody. I've never heard anybody describe it accurately. And anarchy, as far as I'm using the word, means an absence of rules and law, which is assumed to be, in this part of the world, terrible, catastrophic. And like I said with libertarianism, you can't actually get to anarchy, but it might be useful as something to reach for in terms of principles. And hear me out. This is what I'm trying to say is the only way in principle and by definition that anarchy could ever work is if everybody was literally doing the exact thing they're supposed to do without fail. It's a feature of the idea. Everybody has to be behaving themselves for it to be sustainable for even one day. It's an interesting, fact that pertains to anarchy. The only way it can ever work is if everybody's behaving themselves. So my idea is that since anarchy cannot be achieved because, honestly, people aren't ready for it. They could never pull that off. It's an ideal that should be, considered fairly and would be good for people to reach towards in terms of freedom, in terms of empowering people to make independent choices that are consistent with a healthy, happy society and healthy, happy individuals. I think this is a good yardstick. The health and happiness of the communities and the individuals also, where quality of life at the bottom is really the main measurement that you're taking. So all the things I've heard about libertarianism and anarchy are negative, pretty much negative across the board in this part of the world. I'm sure that there are people who feel differently, but the consensus, the mainstream, overarching point of view is that these things are terrible. They would be disastrous for everybody, and I'm not even suggesting that they are wrong necessarily, these people, but I think that it's not being examined accurately. I think that it's being misrepresented because any move in that direction would subtract from the centralized power structure that people have already. The current power structure of cronyism, the shadow government that's made up of an oligarchy, nepotism, the people who are brought into power because they know people, not because they were elected. And it's a big, big subject, actually, if you want to get into democracy and the failure of democracy. I've made videos about that. I don't necessarily want to rehash it here, but I will connect the idea that democracy has an inherent contradiction on the surface, even, when it's used for a starting point for politics, such as we are told it is. And that contradiction is that if people were able to be democratically voted into office, so to speak, would there not be a contradiction with controlling the treasury and buying votes? Okay, when are you told about the possibility of buying votes? Or can votes be bought? Let's start with that. Can votes be bought? And if votes can be bought, what does access to the treasury itself and the ability to literally print money do to democracy as a starting point? Well, there's an answer. It corrupts it. It makes it so that you don't actually have democracy if elected people are able to print money and buy votes with it. It's a contradiction. It's a fundamental fatal flaw is what it is. However, democracy does serve an important purpose as a means of preventing war if all else fails. And it's this part here that I think people are confused about. As a last resort, democracy is extremely useful, but not as a first resort. It can't be a Swiss Army knife of politics, and that's what we're told that it is, even though that's not what we're doing. You go to the polls and you make yourself feel useful and busy so that you can say you did your best and you can get back to work. That's what our democracy is about. You find a handful of pre-selected options on the ballot, if you vote at all, and you say, well, it could be worse. I guess the reason everything sucks is because not enough people voted right. And then you go back to your tax cubicle and you start slaving away. As designed, this is how it's supposed to work. But you won't find any big issues on the ballot, ever, I'm quite sure. You won't find any radical reform issues, such as a basic redesign of our economic system. That's never going to appear on the ballot. You're not going to find anything that would upset the balance of power, because that would be illegal. You're not going to vote on anything important, in other words. So it's mainly a distraction, so to make you feel like you did something, so that you could say you did your best and get back to work. And it's not even really a democracy, okay? It's not. It's people being brought into power who know people, who were able to afford it because they know people. And it's very much economically driven, isn't it? So again, if you can buy votes and if you can buy positions of power, it's not a democracy. Anyhow, that's enough about our current system. I'm talking in principle, idealistically, what anarchy is useful for. Anarchy is, like I said for the last time, in summary, a worthy objective to reach for because it represents the only situation where everybody's doing exactly what they're supposed to do by definition. You don't have to agree or disagree. It's the only way it could possibly work, and therefore you're being lied to about it. You're being lied to about it so that you don't question anything. They say, we don't give you enough information to think about this. We didn't educate you to think for yourselves, and we don't tell you what's going on because it's a matter of national security at this point. Leave the philosophy to our policymakers. That's why you elected us. But you didn't. You didn't even elect them. So maybe start questioning things. Maybe start asking yourself why independent thought is discouraged so strongly in this part of the world. Why it's not being taught in schools, but obedience is. Compliance, how to follow directions, and how to pay your taxes, most importantly. And how to keep your parents paying taxes, and how to indoctrinate your kids into paying taxes at kindergarten, beginning at kindergarten by law, at gunpoint. I digress. Reach out if you like with questions or comments to whitehotrobot@gmail.com. Thank you.